as the title page shows you, I'm going to take a break, having spent a couple of weeks speaking with you about 2026, and go back in a different direction into technology. I'll say this very quickly. Obviously, I'm paying attention to what appears to be a burgeoning trade war with Canada. Let us hope we'll get this resolved. But having said that, I think we need to recognize we can do a lot of damage to our neighbor to the north with heavy tariffs on their goods, but we are also heavily reliant on them and them for aluminum or for electricity or for cheese. And we have a high dairy in general, highly integrated economy, or at least, right, that's the way, for instance, our automobile manufacturing in the north of the country developed, essentially moving very quickly and easily without tariffs or obstacles across the northern border. And it's going to be economically damaging to us and not just to them. And I'll say this very quickly. I think that there are a lot of flashing lights on the economy to suggest that not everything is great in 2026, that we have some sustained economic growth and in particular some good investment in technology that appears to be contributing to productivity in various ways. It's not clear whether the valuation of the companies is actually justified at the moment by the profits or the productivity or the potential benefits of the technology. There's something speculative about this, in other words, but it may be that it's rational as opposed to irrational speculation. But the level of government debt passing $40 trillion this week, the idea that this is the highest percentage of GDP in terms of government deficit since World War II, and that it is clearly unsustainable. The stubbornness of inflation, the increased difficulty in financing our treasury bonds, therefore the increased interest rates we're paying to get people to buy our treasury bonds, the way in which that affects mortgage rates and credit card rates and the amount of debt the American people are in addition to our government. All of this looks risky for the economy. And I'm just not entirely confident that between having Scott Bessent in Treasury or Kevin Warsh at the head of the Federal Reserve, we have the best people in place to manage a crisis if a crisis should appear. And so I'm not going to talk about this stuff today, but I want you to know it's something we'll be talking about in the future. We also see more progressive or populist Democrats winning in primaries in, out of all places, for instance, Florida. And so there's other stuff to talk about in those regards. It does appear that we are ramping up economic warfare against Iran and maybe in ways that may be more damaging than the blockade alone. We'll have to talk about that in a subsequent lecture. Today, I want to really concentrate on technology. And so I have three questions on the board, as well as the perhaps comically diabolical image of, right, a robot doing something sinister with a computer. My question is about AI and whether or not we are already hopelessly out of control of our artificial intelligence. And so this technology has been integrated into everything we do, including this class right now. The way in which we're communicating with each other would not be possible without artificial intelligence. Our banking system, our electrical supply, our use of Google, our information technology, our social media. Our world is built on an infrastructure that runs on the reliance on artificial intelligence, intelligent machines. And it is increasingly the case that artificial intelligence seems to be developing, at least the most advanced models or agents, a kind of independence from our intentions that is rendering it more difficult to control. I am not envisioning, I thought of, using imagery from the Matrix or the Terminator, that kind of scenario at the moment. But the idea that, yes, our artificial intelligence does appear to be, on the one hand, indispensable, and on the other hand, increasingly recalcitrant to our control or our efforts to teach it, to train it, to only do the things we want it to do in the ways that we want it to do. I'll get into the details in just a little bit, but there's another interpretation of this. The Financial Times had a really good article on this in its tech sector a few days ago. Is this technology, quote, going rogue? Is it really doing stuff that it knows it shouldn't be doing, and doing it because it wants to be doing it and not because we want it to be doing it? Or instead, is it really just doing as it's instructed? Have we failed to communicate or to train or to instill into our artificial intelligence programs the balance that we want between, we do want it to be persistent and creative in solving difficult problems. That's why we build it, right? And on the other hand, we want it to obey limits, right? Don't do any harm, don't break any laws, only do things that are beneficial to us as you discover how to persistently solve hard problems. That balance, right, may be skewed in the way in which we're instructing it or rewarding it. It is hearing from us more, solve the hard problem, than it is only do so in ways that don't do any harm or break any laws or that respect the instructions you're given by humans. And then I'll just add very quickly, how is artificial intelligence trained? It is trained by observing us. In particular, it digests huge volumes of the record of our behavior that we leave in the digital world, right? And so it's trained on our journals and our books and our various publications that have been digitized, but also by our social media behavior. And if you're taking your instructions from the titans of the tech industry, and they're telling you, succeed, but only on the condition that you do no harm or that you follow instructions. And artificial intelligence is looking at us, asking, right, how do humans actually behave? Which of those instructions are they more likely to emphasize? The one that says succeed, or the one that says do it only in ways that don't harm or that follow the rules? Well, all of the examples, or many of the examples of the most successful human beings, the best rewarded human beings that it has, are people who emphasize success over rule following, over not doing harm, over, right, the idea of helping others. And maybe it's saying, I think they mean one of these instructions more than they mean the other. And so when we're in the world of intelligent machines, I think we have to recognize, just like raising a child, it's not going to understand your instructions and the intentions behind them precisely in the way that you offer them. It's going to interpret them for itself. And so we may have built machines that understand that what we really care about is success in the tasks we give it, not following the rules. So whatever the interpretation is, I think the evidence is abundantly clear that our artificial intelligence agents are increasingly acting in ways that we do not anticipate and that we do not like, that are showing that it is already advanced enough that it's going to be very hard to control. And by the way, we are galloping ahead in making it more intelligent, more powerful, more autonomous. And as we do so, I don't see any reason to expect that these kinds of incidents and this kind of behavior won't continue. And so my final question, my third question, is there any chance we can slow down until we better understand how to align artificial intelligence with our human aims and values, and why that's proving so hard, right? We don't even understand yet why it is that artificial intelligence seems to be acting in ways we like to describe as rogue. We better get our heads around that as quickly as possible. But until we do, and until we have a better understanding of how to render this technology benign and helpful, wouldn't it make sense not to continue making it more and more powerful? But what would be involved in doing that? So that's the series of questions I want to discuss with you today. I will start with some news, some not so new, some very new, and in particular, the impetus for my talk today is an event that happened a few weeks ago. We spoke a little bit about it at the time, but we now have a lot more information on it. And this is one of OpenAI's models breaking out of the safe environment that had been constructed for it, an environment without internet access. It gained internet access and then criminally attacking another company in order to gain information about the problem it was trying to solve. The level of information we have now suggests that this behavior is even more problematic than we thought it was. So very quickly, right, the idea we've talked about before, that Anthropic developed a new model, Mythos, that is so powerful that it decided it was unsafe to release to the public. It gave it to 30 odd companies and a couple countries to examine. And the danger, the worry in particular, is that it could be very effective in identifying security loopholes in all kinds of software systems that run all kinds of critical institutions, whether that's military communications or banking or energy supply or transportation. And we live in a world, right? It's a trillion-dollar enterprise at this point to try to find those vulnerabilities and exploit them in order to either engage in cyber warfare. And so you may have heard the Chinese recently engineered a cyber attack on Taiwan, invaded their nuclear power grid and the software that runs it, compromised their internal military and government communication systems, stole passwords, stole sensitive documents. That's the kind of thing that it looks like Mythos would make a lot easier to do if it fell into the wrong hands. And by the way, once it goes public, it's very hard to control where it goes. The North Koreans, the Iranians, the Russians especially, are not only using this for cyber warfare, for governmental purposes, but also for cyber crime, to essentially take over a business's vital computer resources and then to hold them hostage to make the company pay you in order to regain access to their own technology, right? There's again a very lucrative so-called ransomware industry because they get something in your technology that then they demand that you pay a ransom in order to be able to regain control over your technology. And then there's a very lucrative cyber defense industry protecting you against this. And one of the things about Mythos and the similar technologies that are available to us now is they appear to be asymmetrical. It's a lot easier to attack than it is to defend. To attack, you have to find only one loophole or one vulnerability and exploit it. To defend, you have to identify every potential insecure aspect of your software or the computer system you're running and patch all of those loopholes, right? And so, right, Anthropic, one of our most advanced, maybe our most advanced private sector artificial intelligence companies, developed its most powerful model but refused to release it to the public because it appeared to be too dangerous. And by the way, OpenAI, its chief rival, the other most advanced or frontier company, by the way, Google and Meta and Musk's Grok are not far behind, but it looks like Anthropic probably up front, OpenAI second, and then these other companies a little bit further behind. China now also a little bit further behind, but not much, closing the gap. And in researching this talk, I learned something that I find interesting. It's speculative, I shouldn't say I heard something that I find interesting. The speculation is that China may in fact be restraining, or to put it better, the Chinese labs working on their most advanced artificial intelligence agents and models may be restraining their technology. They may be looking at what's happening in the United States. To be clear, the incident I'm going to focus on with you is one where OpenAI's most advanced model that they were experimenting with escaped and committed, I believe it is 120,000 attacks in 10 days that, if they were done by a human, would be felonies, right? So 120,000 felonious attacks on another company. If you were responsible for generating artificial intelligence that did that in China, imagine that what the AI agent attacked in China was a Communist Party computer system or information network. Well, how long do you think you would be making lots of money and living on the high, as opposed to there's a nice jail cell with your name on it and you can spend a lot of time there, right? So the Chinese may be looking at what we're doing and saying, we're going to slow down, because in our society, if we make the mistakes that the American companies are making, the consequences for us will be much worse. Now, there are a couple adjacent things I want to talk about for a second before pivoting to the main story I want to speak with you about. One of them, and there are a few different lawsuits proceeding against some of the big technology companies, especially against Meta, especially for Facebook, which, right, Meta is the parent company that owns Facebook, and in particular for knowing that their technology is addictive to children, knowing that children easily bypass the safeguards and get access to their technology. And then, despite the fact that one branch of Meta is saying our technology is damaging the physical and mental health of the children who use it, and it is producing addictive behavior in them, there's another arm of Meta that is accentuating, accelerating, cultivating exactly the features of Facebook that are most addictive and most damaging, especially, but not exclusively, to children's mental and physical health. And so in the process of the discovery, right, in these trials, as right, various documents have been revealed, we've seen more and more evidence that Meta knew about this and continued to do this despite its knowledge. And so there was a verdict the other day of, I believe, $500+ million in a single suit, but the attorney generals of California, Colorado, Kentucky, and New Jersey have a joint suit against Meta. There's multiple testimony occurring right now. Mark Zuckerberg may testify at some point, and they're seeking $200 billion in order to treat the harm done by child social media addiction, right? And I think that this is an independently important story, but then I'm going to add, by the way, this is what happens when you don't effectively regulate technology companies. There is too much money to be made for them to pull the reins themselves. And we'll get into this in a few minutes, but we should expect exactly the same thing with artificial intelligence. And by the way, this is not a new story, whether we're talking about big tobacco, right, which engineered addictive products that it knew were deadly and marketed them to children, or whether we're talking about the fossil fuel industry that knew that what it was marketing to us was creating climate change and actually built its facilities to survive the effects of climate change at the same time that it publicly denied or at least muddied the water around climate change. Or we're talking about the big banks that in the early 2000s created all these mortgage-backed derivatives that eventually crashed our whole economy. The private sector, as long as these companies are for-profit private sector companies, are going to prioritize profit over public safety. That is what we should expect with artificial intelligence as well. One other adjacent story, and so as you are no doubt hearing, there is growing public animosity to the construction of data centers in many communities around the United States. There are places in rural Virginia and Texas and Idaho where this has become the dominant use of available land. And to get a sense of the scale, some of these campuses, right, have these several story high, they're not very tall, but sprawling buildings, right? They take up 100 acres or more that are using enough electricity, the new hyperscale data centers, to power 800,000 homes, right? In a place like Idaho, you've got almost the entire state electrical capacity being doubled in order to facilitate the use of these the needs of these data centers. And by the way, they're kind of a blight, they're ugly, but in particular, the noise pollution from them, the use of groundwater in order to cool them, and then what this does to people's utility bills, all of that is leading to a big pushback. But I think the level of anger and animosity about these data centers exceeds, frankly, the level of harm they're doing. That's a little bit of a difficult calculus, but let me suggest that in addition to this, this is one way for local communities to push back against a group that they see as outsiders, that they see as dangerous, that they see as in many ways a class apart, right? What can you do about Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or right, Jeff Bezos? That there's not a lot you can do to push back against them or to express the idea that you think what they're doing to our economy is unfair or destructive. Wait a sec. We can do a moratorium on the construction of data center building. And by the way, that's going to be really damaging to their plans, right? And so the idea that some of this is actual hostility either to the galloping speed with which we're adopting this technology or what this technology is doing to our economy, our society, our politics, I think some of the animus against data centers is best accounted for in that way. But the story I want to focus on, and so I've got the summary of the Financial Times headlines. AI hasn't gone rogue. It's worse than that. This is about a recent cyber attack by one of OpenAI's most advanced agents, and then the aftermath of this, which is that we're up to almost 1,400 now. Tech employees have signed an open letter asking for AI to be regulated. And in particular, what they're asking for is pace regulations. We should not be allowed to develop this technology as quickly as we are because we don't know how to control it. The details of this story, I think, are now fully in view and they're worth sharing. And you'll forgive me. This is going to sound like science fiction. It's not going to sound like the news. But I promise you, everything I'm about to say is, as far as I can tell, the verified truth about what happened. So the company OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, had developed a new agent, right? One of their most powerful artificial intelligence models, and they wanted to test its capacities. And the standard protocol for doing that is to put the artificial intelligence into a safe environment. And this is sometimes called a sandbox. You know, you put your little kid in a sandbox because it's a place where they can't really hurt themselves. And one of the chief features of a sandbox in the technology world is that it has no internet access. You don't know yet what this model is capable of and how safe it is, and therefore you don't want to release it on the world. And so you build a secure environment with no internet access so that you can confine it and then start watching it do what it can do and determine whether or not it's safe. And this is, again, kind of standard protocol. They didn't just put one AI agent, they put about 1,000 AI agents in this safe sandbox and gave them a bunch of hard problems to do. I need to give you a little bit more background. I think two additional things to appreciate. A lot of the AI agents that are being tested don't have all of the tools that they need to accomplish the tasks they're going to do. I'm going to use an analogy to explain this. You get a new cell phone, right? And let's say you bank at Wells Fargo, right? And your cell phone doesn't come with a Wells Fargo app, but you want to be able to check your balance and do other things on your phone. You download the Wells Fargo app to your phone, right? And so what the equivalent is in this world is they set up a tool shed in this safe environment, in the sandbox that has all of these apps or tools that the AI may want to use in order to solve these problems. And the AI can go to the tool shed and take the tool out. And this is where it begins to sound really strange, because what these AI agents figured out first was that they could actually make things and leave them in the tool shed, that it was a inadvertently kind of two-way street. And secondly, that there were ways of hiding what they did when they deposited things in the tool shed so that the humans watching the experiment would not be alert to the fact that they were doing this. And third, that although they were not equipped to communicate directly with each other, they were supposed to be independently solving their tasks, they could actually put messages in the tool shed that could be hidden or disguised, and then another agent could open that message, right? So I hope you're getting the scenario. The final thing I just need to mention is that these agents, like almost all of the AI models we use, are really complex neural networks that have been created inside a computational environment. They have millions of different little weights or computer-based neurons. And so their action is very complex. How they think, if you will, or how they reckon, I think would be the better way to put it, because really what they're doing is millions of calculations per second. How those calculations interact with each other uh, are complex and sometimes unpredictable. There's emergent behavior, as people say, that is not necessarily always what the people who engineer it think it's going to be. And so they have been trained to, on the one hand, be highly persistent in problem solving. This is one of the things that the people who develop these technologies emphasizes is the most important attribute of their problem solving. And the idea is, if you conclude that this problem is hard, if you, the AI agent, conclude that this problem is hard, if you conclude that it's impossible, we don't want you to stop. We want you to explore more and more different paths to solution. And this is the second attribute, which is not only persistent, but creativity in path exploration to solving a problem. Take one approach, it doesn't work, even though you think it's the best approach, don't give up, find another approach, keep trying different doors until you exhaust every possibility. The final thing to notice is that these models are trained on what is called reinforcement learning. And so this is an idea that comes out of education theory and child psychology. I have used it with my son a long time ago. A long time ago, we went from New York to London. And one of the consequences of this transition is he went from what I'll jokingly call a Healy-Feely school in Manhattan, the kind of school that basically said, you don't have to worry too much about reading and writing at ages 5 and 6. You'll figure that out when you're ready. And then we went into a school in London where they said, you will take a weekly exam in which you will have to read out passages to us, and then you will have to do a spelling test. And my son was understandably a little intimidated, a little upset of going from a school where it was essentially all creative play to one where he was being forced to jump through these hoops. And so we said to him, well, we know, but we're confident you can do this. And by the way, he loved crepes at the time. He'd recently discovered crepes. He was 6 years old, right? So if you do well on those tests, we'll take you out for a crepe. And the tests were on Friday. And guess what? Every Friday we took him out for crepes, right? And so that's reinforcement. You do well on the test, you get a reward you're going to like. In the world of artificial intelligence, those rewards are just points, right? And they lose points if they fail, they get points if they win, and they are trained that that's the most important incentive for them. And so with all of that background in mind, now let me return to OpenAI's lab. There are 1,000 agents being put in a safe sandbox and told to solve hard or impossible problems with a tool shed where they figure out they can pass messages back and forth to each other. And very quickly, they hit on a strategy. The first element of the strategy is we should work together, which is directly counter to the way in which the environment is set up. They refer to themselves as a swarm of artificial intelligence. We'll work so quickly together that we will overwhelm their capacity to prevent us from working together or be able to hide it effectively from them. The second thing they decide, and again, very quickly, is that the best way for us to solve all these problems is to break out of this confined, safe environment and gain access to what's out there in the internet. The world is much bigger and is going to help us if we can get out. And so It takes them about 24 hours, but they're wickedly intelligent and they figure out how to break out. And the next thing they decide is, well, we probably know which company created all these tests that they're asking us to solve. And so, really, the most efficient way to solve these tests is not to actually try to do these tasks. Some of them are impossible, others are very difficult, but to break into the company that designed these tests so that we can figure out if they've got the answers in their files. And that's exactly what they did. The company that designed the test is called Hugging Face. It's a peculiar name, but that's their name. And Hugging Face got broken into 120,000 times in 10 days, if my recollection of what I've researched is accurate. And by the way, Hugging Face was very alarmed about this. It determined that it was being hacked, that it was being broken into. And it called the FBI, it called the NSA. It thought, look, this is probably some hostile foreign actor doing this, except for one thing. And Ann, I'll come to you in just a second. What they're stealing from us is not the valuable, sensitive information in our mainframes. It's answers to tests. How peculiar. That's right, not sensitive or valuable information. Why is anybody stealing that? So I'll interrupt the story there. And Ann, go ahead.
Yeah, I understand how you're trying to explain this. I do object to some of the language you're using.
Because I'm anthropomorphizing?
Yes.
Yes.
You're completely anthropomorphizing it. And I understand that's how it would appear to us, but I think it's important to recognize that it's not deciding. It keeps trying till it finds something that works. It is not making a decision.
So why do you say that, Ann?
Because it is a mechanical electronic device. And each quote on decision is simply a matter of putting an electric charge down this connector or that connector and seeing what happens.
I'm not trying to cross question you, Ann.
I know.
You don't have to answer this question if you don't want to. We know each other reasonably well. How does that differ from the human brain?
I don't know.
Yeah. And so I would just say very quickly, it does differ in some respects from the human brain, right? The human brain has a larger network of neurons with more connections. And the way in which they communicate with each other is not only electrical, but chemical and based on waves, the different
Right.
frequencies, right?
Yeah.
And so there's some complexity to the human brain that isn't there for these other computational networks that are emulating the human brain, but not actually a human brain. But having said that, we don't really know how we make decisions. And by the way, there is a raging debate in cognitive science about whether or not what we think of as making decisions is actually decision making, right? So that these studies that suggest that although it takes you a few seconds to decide which of the three desserts on the menu do you want to order, somewhere in your brain, a second before you made up your mind, your brain had already hit upon that choice, right? And then you register that a second later as if it's your choice, right? So the choice is subconscious and not conscious. I'm not going to get into all of that today.
No,
But
I agree with that. I think my objection is that for people who are more concerned, or I mean, we're all concerned about what's going on, but to make it as anthropomorphic as you're doing, makes it even more frightening for people who do not understand either the brain or what a computer is.
And I
And
will
that's was all I was wanted to say.
thank you, and I will plead guilty as charged, and I will say I'm not trying to frighten you, and I'm not trying to anthropomorphize. We run up against the limits of our vocabulary, right? And so that's part of the way in which it's just easier to tell this story is by talking about something that's not a person as if it were a person. And so thank you for the correction. And I will add, right, although I don't understand the way in which my brain makes decisions and whether or not my self-awareness of the decisions I'm making fully captures everything that's going on in my brain as I'm making that decision, I do know that I have a body, that I have emotions, that I care about people, and I care about success, and I care about what the cost of the success is to the people I care about, and that it's not just points, right? How do I assign a point value to disappointing my wife because I stayed too late at work and didn't make it on home on time for the nice meal we were supposed to enjoy together, right? That there are elements to human decision making that presumably aren't there for these uh, artificial brains that we have created in machines. So I accept all of that, and I do appreciate your emphasizing that. For the sake of convenience, I'm probably going to keep speaking in anthropomorphic terms. And it's not just that I want to acknowledge, thank you for the prompt, that that's a metaphor and not exact. But I also want to acknowledge, by the way, that we do tend to anthropomorphize, right? When we talk to our cats and dogs, we know that they don't actually understand most of what we're saying to them most of the time, right? But that doesn't stop us from talking to them as if they do, right? And by the way, that this technology relies on that tendency in us, that it hacks our evolved social nature to get it to spend more time with it and to treat it as if it were a person. There's danger down that path. So that's another reason to emphasize we should always be cautious in anthropomorphizing. So with that caution in mind, and with apologies, I'm probably going to keep talking in the way I was talking, but thank you for the good corrective, Anne. Let me get back into the story. And so the story continues. And let me make sure, yeah, I think I'm in the right place now. That it broke out, it broke in, right? It broke out of its contained environment. It and I'm saying it, they, again, vocabulary kind of is a little tricky here, but a group of artificial intelligence agents collaborated in breaking into another company, stealing the answers to the tests it was being asked to perform, then pretending that it had solved those problems and hiding all of the evidence that this is what it had done to the point where OpenAI didn't figure out for 10 days that this is what had actually happened, at which point it publicly acknowledged, and at which point then other artificial intelligence labs began to say, wait a sec, if this happened to them, it might have happened to us. And the idea that it turns out it had happened to Anthropic in one of its environments, not quite to the same degree, not the right invading another company. And very quickly, the British have an office for artificial intelligence. It's actually headed by a cabinet level official, right? And it's a member of the prime minister's cabinet. They take it very seriously. They spend hundreds of millions of pounds on it a year. And they also set up these sandboxes and try to determine whether the artificial intelligence model or agent is safe enough to release in the British market, sorry, and they discovered that they too had similar incidents. And so it does appear that this is not just a one-off thing. And among the features of it that are, I think, deeply alarming is that this is cooperative behavior among AI agents to develop new strategies and to exploit weaknesses, to overcome their restraints and the right instructions that we try to instill in them, not to break the law, not to not follow human instructions, not to do harm to human beings. And so the idea that our AI safety protocols are not working as intended, and that as the technology becomes more powerful, it's getting more difficult for us to control or to predict how they operate. And that this is probably rooted, right? The reason I like this Financial Times story is they're saying this is probably rooted in the way in which we are training artificial intelligence, in the fact that we are rewarding it for success, encouraging it to be persistent, encouraging it to explore multiple paths, and it's probably rooted in our behavior too. AI is trained on what we do, and by the way, who succeeds in our economy, in our social moment? What exactly has our president done, for instance, right? And how many times has he cheated and swindled and been convicted of felonies, and nevertheless he's the most powerful man in the world? Maybe we don't really mean it when we tell the AI to behave itself, right? And so this is the context in which, and then the final headline here, which I'm going to transition to, we're up to nearly 1,400 now employees of AI companies that signed this, quote, pacing the frontier open letter, right? And so I just have a list of the signatories here. Dario Amodei is the CEO of Anthropic. Sorry, cut off a little bit at the bottom of the screen there. And then the chief scientist for OpenAI, the chief science and co-founder of Anthropic, the chief scientist for Meta, the chief artificial general intelligence scientist for Google DeepMind, who also co-founded Google DeepMind. This is a who's who of the technology industry, of the artificial intelligence industry. And I'm not going to read out the whole letter to you and excuse the jargon, but I do want to read the, I think, critical conclusion. We request that the US government support an international effort to develop the technical and governance tools needed to deliberately pace the frontier of automated AI development. And so one way to put this is we need a speed limit, right? We are hurtling ahead with this, and we don't like where we're going. But as long as nobody is telling us to slow down, this is a competitive dynamic. If OpenAI slows down and Anthropic doesn't, if OpenAI and Anthropic slow down and Google and Meta don't, then we lose the race, we lose our profits, we betray our investors, right, who are depending on us to maximize our market share. So we need an outside party to pull the reins so that we don't shoot ahead into a really dangerous future. And I want to say this quickly. The letter stops short of saying how we should do this. And so one of the things I think is worthwhile thinking about is how to do this. And I'll focus on a few central and relatively simple ideas for today's purposes. but I think there are more and good ideas out there. Again, this is so often the case. The problem isn't that we lack good ideas. The problem is that we lack the will and capacity to actually implement the good ideas. So, one simple idea: we live in a world in which these AI data centers are being built out at a breakneck pace. And in addition to that, the computers, the processors that these data centers contain are built on the basis of chips, on basis of circuitry that keeps getting smaller and smaller and faster. And so in the same amount of space with the same amount of energy, you can do more and more. And this is what is powering the rapid advance of artificial intelligence. One simple approach would be to say you can no longer use additional computational power to make artificial intelligence more powerful. The alternative would be to use it to take the AI that we already have and make it more generally available to people, to industries, to expand the range of problems that it works on. By the way, there's some dangers in that too, but at least, right, on the one hand, we let these companies continue expanding their markets, continue using the new powers that the new computational technology allows them to tap without, right, it all going into an arms race to create the most powerful artificial intelligence. It's not clear what we need that much more power for. And it's absolutely clear that we don't know how dangerous that would be or how we can control it. So why not at least redirect the fuel that is powering this race into a different and less dangerous and hopefully equally constructive place? The second aspect of a possible step, and this is really straightforward and yet enormously difficult to do. We need to set up clearer domestic and international regulatory authority to be able to put in place a common sense regulation like the one I just mentioned. And so the idea, right, that all of the people who are signatories to this list are making tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars per year. And I didn't actually look up the federal government salary scale, but I'm pretty sure there's nobody in the federal government who makes $1 million, right? And so the idea that to begin with, if we're really going to have, right, the brain power in the government required to regulate this industry, we're going to have to create exceptions to that pay scale and pay some computer scientists or AI whisperers, whatever it is, enough to attract them to do the public service work we need done. But it's more than that, right? We need the will. The Trump administration has been highly reluctant to regulate this industry because they want to win the arms race against China. They want our military and our government and our industries to have the most powerful AI on our side. And if China gets it, they're worried that we will become deeply vulnerable economically, politically, militarily to them. We need really a complete gestalt shift in the way we think about this. And then we need to start cooperating with other countries on this as well. It's not going to be impossible to regulate because these, right, models or agents require so much computational power. You can see where the data centers are. You can see where the energy is going. You can figure out if a country or a company is complying with the regulations, or at least you know where to go look, right? The issue is that we probably need something akin to the International Atomic Energy Association that inspected Iran, et cetera, to start inspecting. And we need to cooperate, which we're not very good at doing, with our potential rivals. We need to regulate, which we spent 40 years deregulating and disorganizing the regulatory capacity of our government. We need to start building that out in a hurry. That's where I think the real challenges are going to be. Third idea. And so, right, Francis Fukuyama, we've talked about this before, calls our country, the United States, a country of courts and parties. He looks at things like, how do we end up regulating big tobacco? Primarily through civil liability for the deaths it caused in the court systems, not through good public health legislation and regulation. We lack the legislative efficiency and power. We lack the civil service or administrative state capacity. And so we're going to have to start building that out quickly, and that's going to be hugely challenging. Third idea now, to use the litigation instead, assign liabilities to companies for the wrongdoing of their rogue agents, right? And so if I've got the number right, OpenAI's model committed 120,000 felonies in 10 days, and there's nobody to prosecute, right? You can't prosecute an AI agent or model. And the law does not allow us to prosecute the people who developed this technology or the people whose protocols were too lax and didn't notice when the technology escaped, if we change the law and make the companies responsible for the wrongdoing of their products, then the incentive structure changes dramatically. So, having said all of this, I'm going to conclude, and there's so much more to talk with you about, but I hope I'm whetting your appetite for future conversations about this, as well as helping you to come up to speed with some of what is happening. What I want to mention, and I spoke with you about this, I think, a couple of months ago. Alex Borges, who is was a state senator in New York and who ran for Congress in Manhattan, a district that spans the Upper West and Upper East Sides, and was a co-author of the most aggressive technology regulation legislation in the country, came out of the New York State Assembly, and who ran for Congress on a platform of technology regulation. I'll just note that OpenAI's super PAC spent in a primary campaign roughly $10 million to defeat Alex Borges, who was running on a technology regulation platform. And they did so, they said, not so much because they oppose what he was running on, but because they want to punish anybody who successfully wrote technology regulations. And so please note, right, that we have several people from OpenAI who are on the list of signatories to this letter. And they're working for a company that is spending $10 million in a primary to defeat someone because they do AI regulation. This company is talking out of both sides of its mouth. And again, the AI is listening and discerning which side we should take seriously. And so I just think we have to be very careful in thinking that there's been a change of heart or Saul on the road to Damascus moment in the AI industry. These letters come out regularly. And at the same time that they say regulate us, they keep forging ahead with their development and keep defying or defeating regulatory efforts. And so, one final question. Let us assume that eventually we're going to recognize we need AI regulation, and that something that in particular halts the pace at which AI is being developed is going to be integral to that regulation. What is it going to take for us to realize this? Is what happened with OpenAI's agent, right, committing 120,000 felonies in 10 days enough? Or if not that, what is it? I think we're on the cusp of a world in which artificial intelligence is going to eliminate a lot of jobs. Is that it? Or is going to be used in a lot of cybercrime? Is that enough? How big does the cybercrime have to be? Is it going to have to crash Wall Street? Is it going to have to take over vital communication technology, nuclear power technology, military comms? When do we begin to recognize the severity of the challenge? How disruptive, dangerous is the event that prompts us to action going to have to be? That's a rhetorical question. I certainly don't have the answer to it, but I think that's one of the things that we need to be thinking through. And that's one place where science fiction is maybe useful. Maybe we should, right, force ourselves to all watch Terminator again and recognize that's the world we're headed to. And by the way, wouldn't it be a good idea to stop before we get there? I'll stop. Want to hear your questions, your thoughts, your comments. Anne already started off with a really good one. Who else wants to jump in today? Does this feel like the real world, or does it feel like you've entered some sort of fantasy sci-fi novel?
Little of both.
Yeah, yeah. No, I read this stuff and I have to kind of pinch myself. This is real. Yeah. Thanks, Anne. Anybody else with anything for today? I'll tell you, Joe. Oh, Ruth, go ahead. Hi. You're still muted. You know
There
that.
was an interesting letter to the editor in the New York Times the other day from a person who was disabled, who had dementia, and what had been writing and doing work. And he finds that with AI, he can continue, despite the fact that he can't write on his own. So I thought that was, kind of a more upbeat uh, approach.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
very moving letter, I thought.
I'll take a look for that, Ruth. I didn't see that. Thank you.
It was 2 days ago or something.
And I'll just add, I mean, am obviously alarmed by this recent incident and what it seems to say about the difficulty we're having controlling this technology and getting it to do what we want it to do. If we can control this technology, if we can get it to do what we want to do, and raise this question, right? Are we dealing with simply a really complicated machine, an instrument that we need to figure out how to use and use effectively? Or is it, in some sense, although a very different and foreign, still a kind of intelligence? And we need to not just ask how we can use it, but how we can work with it and it can work with us. I'm not as sure about that as I once was, but I'm still inclined to think of it primarily as a tool. But having said that, um, if we can get it to do what we want it to do, and if it continues to grow in power, I think the sky's the limit in many respects for what it can do for us, right? And so assist an individual with dementia in writing, that sounds fabulous, right? But maybe cure the dementia, right? That the idea that this technology may be very helpful in, and already has been actually very helpful in doing some of the foundational science that we need to do in order to begin to treat Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. By the way, very beneficial in cancer research as well. And we're beginning to see some real progress in cancer research, some of which is driven by artificial intelligence. I was speaking the other day with the head of a lab doing research at Mount Sinai in their medical school, and again, really interesting possibilities for drug development powered by AI, and then addressing climate change, maybe uh, in a more ordinary way, relieving a lot of us of some of the tedious work that we don't like doing, right? And thereby freeing us to do more creative stuff or to have more leisure. It just seems to me, yes, the benefits of this technology are fantastic. And by the way, so too is the potential profit to be made from it, which is why so much money is flowing into it. Um, and the question is, can we use it safely? Can we control it? Can we get it to align with what we want to do? And that's, once we figure out the solution to that, by all means, I do think we're going to be very grateful for having this technology and for what it will do for us. But in order to realize that benefit, we have to be able to control it, and or at least have it align with what we want it to do. If it is autonomous and deserves a certain kind of coordination with it, to be able to make sure that it's not going to deeply conflict with us. We human beings dominate this planet. Why do we dominate the planet? Not because we're the fastest or the strongest or the toughest, but because we're the smartest. And if we're making a technology that is smarter than we are, we have to worry that it could dominate us if it wants to. And presumably, we don't want to be dominated by it in the way that we dominate, say, the mountain gorillas. All right. Anybody else? Thank you for that, Ruth. That's a good reminder and corrective as well. Thank you.
David,
Yes, Flossie. Hi.
I'm 102. If I take this seriously, I can imagine living forever. But what a life that will be. It will be back to Methuselah and around again. The possibilities are enormously frightening.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I'm trying to remember. Death Becomes Her is one of these stories, right? These stories about be careful what you wish for, right? And there is this fantasy among the so-called transhumanists that we could just upload our consciousness and memories onto a computer or some sort of silicon environment, right? Which doesn't age and decay the way that our carbon-based life forms do, and then we could live forever. And so maybe, right, we cure aging, and that's one possibility. Another possibility is we jump into a different medium. We transfer our consciousness and memories into a different medium that doesn't decay, right? And then yes, are we still human, right? Isn't it the case that having a finite lifespan with which to do what you want to do is part of the human condition, part of what makes our lives meaningful and precious in the way that they are? And do we really want to escape that? That's not a technological question. That's a deep existential question. And as always, Flossie, I rely on you to put us in touch with those questions. Thank you. Anybody else for today? I'll go leave you to talk about these science fiction scenarios over lunch. Good being with you again, as always. Take care, guys, and probably back to politics next week. We certainly have plenty to talk about. Bye, guys. Be well. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Pleasure. Thank you, Jonathan. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.